Hi, this is Heidi Gaiman from ilovemyshepherd.com with another Mental Health Monday. This month we're talking about emotions, and we're continuing our discussion of emotions and emotional well-being and some steps to getting there, but also just some basic awareness about our emotional health. And so today we're going to talk about emotions on a spectrum and how we kind of experience emotions on a spectrum. And I think you can hear a lot of ideas about emotions. And so, feel free to Google and stuff and you'll find 18 different ideas. But I do want to present this idea to you because I think that so often we've been taught to name and identify our emotions in a very direct method, and to name it something specific, which we talked about last week, which you can catch our emotional well-being episode on emotional granularity, this idea that we want to be able to identify more specifically our emotions. However, I do think it's important to understand that we don't experience emotions always super specifically, but rather we experience an emotional spectrum. And so this actually helps increase our emotional granularity, this ability to understand that emotions aren't just anger or aren't just sadness, but that there's more to the story and that they kind of have like a low end and a high end. And sometimes we are at various places on that spectrum. And so being able to understand that I'm, very angry or a little angry is really helpful. That's like the beginning of emotional granularity, I think, this idea of emotions on a spectrum. We don't want to give it too much specificity while giving it very much specificity. You're like, Heidi, you're not making sense. But let me explain. Notice that there is a spectrum of the way we experience sadness. And so this might come out in our we especially in our culture as, the difference between I'm feeling blue, which is like a low end of sadness. I'm a little blue. We even say low, right? I'm feeling a little low. Well, what does that mean for you? Identifying that is really important. We want to be specific in identifying for ourselves how that feels for each of us. But at the same time, understanding that there's a wide range in what blue means, and blue can also move on to things that are like sad, like an actual kind of bolder way of experiencing that emotion. Then it can also move on to something more extreme like hopelessness or depressed. And so you can kind of begin to understand, do you see how that's like a spectrum of emotion? We don't just experience this like mid-range emotion. I think actually very often we are not experiencing the mid-range. We're experiencing something really like low-key to something like really intense. And so kind of identifying where we're at on that it can be really helpful. Like I said, the way you want to get specific is by identifying how you experience that thing. So giving it some words, but what does that look like and mean for you? There's the idea of arousal. So sometimes we experience like a low key feeling again, or a high keyed up feeling. That's that low to intense. We call it arousal. I also think you can experience this in each other realm. And now I think there's, again, a lot of arguments about what the basic emotions are that we experience. So we won't get into that. You can go to the movie Inside Out for that. How about that? I love that movie. But I don't always, in ways it's super accurate, and in other ways I'm not sure. I came across one of my favorite ways of understanding basic emotions is like about 6 basic emotions, which would be power, peace, joy, fear, anger, and sadness. And so there's actually a really helpful visual. It's like a little wheel of emotions, and I don't again, don't necessarily think it's always 100% accurate, but at the same time, it gives you a little overview about how the spectrum experience happens within, for instance, the emotion of power, or what we call agency, the ability to have control over things or feel like we're in control. So I'll put a link up tomorrow at I Love My Shepherd Facebook page of a blog that shows you this like wheel of the spectrum of emotions within each of those 6 basic emotions. Again, this is all like emotion theory. I'm not saying there's one right way to view this, but how do you experience those things? Kind of how do you feel agency in your life? What brings that to you, both from the external, but also internally? How does it feel like in your body? How are you able to identify it? How does your brain signal, I feel in control in this situation. I feel like I'm experiencing power in this situation. And is that amping me up? Or am I experiencing this in a low grade way? And begin to kind of just explore that for yourself, not judging it, not saying this is the way I definitely, but just explore it for yourself. I really like the idea that we have a basic emotion of peace, which is, I think biblically that idea of contentment, where we add on that, and being able to identify that that's maybe a little bit different than happiness. And it's a little bit different than our experience of, whether we're afraid or not afraid, because I think we can be, just like the Apostle Paul, content in any circumstances, even content when we're experiencing like anger or fear or difficult emotions. And so I really appreciate the addition of these 2 kind of emotional fields we don't really explore, for instance, like in the movie Inside Out or other places, of peace and power. Those are a little different. And we'll go into each of these spectrums of those 6 things in the coming weeks. And so just a little overview this week before we go deeper into it in the coming weeks. Let's go with the power one, because I said I really like that, this idea of agency or feeling in control. Sometimes that feeling is also decisiveness, maybe on the spectrum of that emotion of power can be like a decisive or indecisive, but all the way to like a feeling of helpless can be included in this, how we feel in control or power, not being able to control the people around us or what's happening internally, things in our lives, circumstances, all the way to an experience of emotions of power that we feel like we're gaining power. And it's maybe for some people that's really comfortable, and other people it's really uncomfortable. Maybe some people feel like that emotion feeds them being able to be, kind of negatively pushy, or we would say like in domestically violent relationships, or verbally violent relationships, which are also included in domestic violence, or emotionally violent relationships, also included in domestic violence, by the way. That pushing, that control, that power is actually a feeling that people feed off of negatively. And so that's in that spectrum of emotion. So can you see that, you may not, didn't mean to put my hand over the camera. You may not feel that internally yourself in such an aggressive way, such a high arousal way, but in what ways, when you encounter people, do you experience feelings of power? How are they really positively impacting your life, and how are they not? Where is it important for your sense of safety and self to feel like you have power and to like experience that emotion, and where is it unmeaningful for you to experience that? I think those questions are really important, and we will address that further again, like I said, because power is an important one, mostly because, like I was saying, our sense of safety and sense of self is wrapped up in it. Another one, we already went over the blues, sadness, and hopelessness, but how about a positive one? Content, happy, all the way up to joyful and excited. And I'm kind of making up these spectrums. So I don't know what's on the high end for you, and I don't know what's on the low end for you, but kind of discovering, where am I at on this peace and contentment field? Content, I think, is kind of a low arousal emotion, a low key emotion to experience. And so sometimes we miss it, but it's such a great one to identify and be aware of for ourselves, because it's very satisfying to be content, even when we're not feeling like high arousal, joyful and happy, which I obviously like love those emotions, joyful and happy. But where is content of value? But where are places where content isn't, while important and biblically important, don't get me wrong, where is it not like feeling fulfilling, I guess, for me, so that maybe the Holy Spirit is like using a need maybe to be restless, as kind of restless spirit inside of us, to seek more of, God's word, to seek more experience with him, more time with him, and things like that. So it's not always totally negative to be a little discontent. I think you can start to see how God works in both like positive, what we would consider positive, and what we consider like uncomfortable, or dare I say, some people would say negative emotions, which I don't like that, because I think that they all have their own place. And then there's also like anxious, just feeling a little anxious, butterflies, if you will, like in our stomachs, some things like that, to fear. The basic idea of fear, to, terror and horror and things like that. Those high arousal and low arousal kind of experiences of those emotions. It's really important to be able to identify, those places on the spectrum, like irritation, frustration, and then all the way to rage. We're going to give words to our emotion, and you can see how it's not always cut and dry. You might be like, I'm not sure. Am I irritated, or am I like angry or rageful? And beginning to ask yourself questions in the moment is maybe really helpful. Let's see. Is that all of them? I mentioned the list of emotion words that I found really helpful. And there's all kinds of these on the internet. You can look them up, and we use them in therapy with children all the time for them to be able to identify their emotions. We hang up like little emoji posters and stuff. But at verywellfamily.com, there's a link on the I Love My Shepherd Facebook page. You can find a list of emotion words A to Z that's really, really useful. Begin to look at them, begin to be thinking about what spectrum they're on and how we experience those things on a high end and a low end. Just kind of a way to think about emotions that might be really helpful, so we don't make too much of them or too little of them. That's where the emotional well-being sweet spot is. We don't want to think too much of it, and we're not going to think too little of it. God is working in all of it. He's working when we're a mess. And he's working when we're able to express ourselves. He's working in all of it. Jesus is the same God who came, died, and rose for us today as he is on the days I'm having a bad day or when I'm having a good day. If you have any questions, please throw them up on the I Love My Shepherd Facebook page or over on YouTube. And we'll go through, like I said, these we'll start to go through these individual emotions and our experience of those spectrums of emotions in the coming weeks. I'll see you next time.